Hello, and welcome to the Raisina Ideas Pod, recorded at the Raisina Dialogue 2025. It is a great pleasure to have with us Mr. Hassan El Khatib, who is Minister for Investment and Trade of Egypt. Sir, welcome to India. Thank you for joining us at Raisina. How are you enjoying your trip so far?
It's very good.
And we're very happy to have you here, particularly because for centuries, actually, Egypt and India have been very important trading partners. It's a vital part of our access to the rest of the world, as it is for many countries in the Indo-Pacific. Could you tell us a little bit about how you are dealing with the new issues that have cropped up in the trade world? And of course, there are questions of tariffs, of trade wars. There is also questions of protectionism in the US and the European Union, among others. There are also security issues in your near neighborhood that have impacted some of our shipments through the Red Sea. What is your view of how this is evolving? Or what is Egypt's view of how it can continue to thrive in a somewhat more contested and difficult atmosphere?
Thank you. Definitely, we are in a world that is changing, fundamentally changing. Globalization, as we've lived it the past 3 to 4 decades, is fading away. We're opening a new chapter. The new chapter is highlighted by nationalism, by borders, by protectionism, as you highlighted, tariffs. And this is not new. So we've seen this literally in the first President Trump term. We're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing that nationalist movement taking place over the past 10 years. And I think even if you look at the projections for some of the elections that will take place in major cities in Europe going forward, you can see that this trend will continue. For an economy like Egypt, in a neighborhood that is not the easiest, our focus as a government, I belong to a new government that took place July last year, is really very simple. We want to be as competitive as possible. We want to create a business environment that is conducive for the private sector to prosper, to invest. We want to boost FDI. And in doing so, we want to maximize the return on what we've invested in infrastructure over the past 10 years. So just to give you very briefly, Egypt, 10 years ago, 2014, we started a major program to stimulate the economy following two revolutions, 2011, 2013. In a big economy like Egypt, big country, a stoppage of the economy means a lot of jobs lost. So the government stepped up the program to put major infrastructure to maximize our unique location. We are centered in 3 continents, Africa, Europe, Asia. And again, we talk about location without the proper infrastructure, then you cannot maximize that return. So we've put a massive network of roads, new cities, 24 new cities, expanded our force, be it on the Mediterranean or the Red Sea, major power projects and renewable energy powers, and public transport massively. And after that, we had 2 challenges that we have to deal with as a new government. One is the role of the private sector, or the share of the private sector is less than what we anticipated. So this is one of our key targets. We want the private sector to take a leading role, going back to 75 to 80% of the investments in the economy, as well as the role of the state. So we want to maintain, contain or reduce the role of the state in the economy. And of course, the debt to GDP is something that we need to manage. Of course, COVID, the Russian war in Ukraine, added to the challenge with inflation, so the government couldn't step back in the right time, 2020, 2021. So our focus today is to make sure that we have a clear policies, be it on the monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade policy, and the role of the state, be as competitive, as I said, in most of these aspects, to attract the right FDI. Our location is unique, and we can be as competitive today to be as a hub for anyone to operate for the 3 countries, hub for exports, as we say.
So I want to sort of follow up on something that you said about the COVID period. And it links up to your point about supply chains and the need to be able to build a certain resilience in them. How does How can India and Egypt cooperate on two issues that are of vital importance to us, which is energy security and food security? I mean, both of those have impacted our local price levels, create domestic political concerns, and both of them have, since the COVID period and the invasion of Ukraine, have become fairly serious. And of course, to go back to history once again, I mean, there was a time when Egypt was the grain basket of the world. That's no longer quite the case. We're all dependent now on imports to a certain degree. So how does one fix this food security and energy security problem that we're in?
Let me first talk about India and Egypt. I think one of the two greatest civilizations. I come here with a great respect. I visited as a tourist several years back. I see a lot of interest from Indians to come and visit Egypt again for our great civilizations there as well. I feel at home when we come here. But again, when we talk about trade between our two great countries, it's tiny vis-a-vis the potential. And that's what I discussed with the Minister of Trade, my counterpart here in India, that we cannot talk about 10, 20%. We need to talk about 2-3 times the trade. Trade and investment is the life of economies, and that's what we should strive to. But when we talk about food security and energy security, it's a major topic. And Egypt today, one of our aspirations is to be a green energy hub. And we're discussing this across all the players. And again, we need that for our own security, but also we think on the green aspect, our greatest potential is already the green. We have plenty of land, plenty of sun, very good wind as well along the Red Sea. And our aspiration, just to give you some numbers, between today and 2040, we need to add 65 gigawatts, majority of which is 85 to 90% will be green. That does not include the green hydrogen potential. The green hydrogen potential, you can add a similar number to that once we unlock the challenges of the industry because of the pricing and all of this. And this is a discussion that we are having actually with Indian players. Trying to have off-takers to that, but also with the European players. But you're spot on. I think we need to talk about this. Energy security and resilience of our economies is what matters going forward. What you started the first question talking about what is happening globally. What matters is that we need to build resilient economies. But we need to have agility as well. Agility does have to move because things are moving much faster than our governments steps, especially when we talk about artificial intelligence and other aspects that are affecting every economy and every person in the world will be affected.
Absolutely correct. In some sense, your area, region, and the continent that you are part of, Africa, is moving in a different direction from the rest of the world in that it is integrating. A free trade area has been announced and efforts are being made in many cases to develop the soft and hard infrastructure that is needed to actually operationalize that. We've talked a little about Egypt's role as a gateway into Europe and for Europe into the Indo-Pacific. How do you view the country's future as Africa grows and approaches a $5 trillion economy?
I think Africa is one of the major files. We have trade agreements, by the way, that can give any company that operates in 270 markets, the EU, the Arab Free Trade Agreement, the Agadir, and of course Africa. And we have two major agreements in Africa, the COMESA, which is around 22 countries in eastern, southern part of Africa, and then of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The challenges in Africa, we need to face them. We talk about Africa, but Africa challenges are transportation, logistics, cost of transport, logistics, credit guarantees and export guarantees. And these are actually the points that we're trying to address. We need to have more ship lines to major ports. We need to create logistical hubs for exports from Egypt and everywhere. And this is what we're discussing. We're discussing with our African friends and how to get again, a country to serve 3-4 countries around it through a logistical hub. We're talking about not only ship liners, but also airlines to get us to some of these markets. The cost of shipping is actually one of the major deterrents for the African trade. But we also need to think of the African countries as well. So it's not only about exporting to Africa, but you also need to give them benefit because it has to be mutual. It has to be a balanced trade. I think there's huge potential. We're putting our heads together and the teams to put it. There is a physical infrastructure that needs to be put. We've been looking at Chad, for example, which is a country south of Libya, and they have massive wealth in livestock, for example, and they have one slaughterhouse. There is no roads connecting us. And again, what we're thinking today, and we're discussing with the Chad government, is to put a road from Egypt.
So they have one slaughterhouse, so the herds have to be driven.
Yes.
Oh, that's not very
so
efficient.
This is just one example that we have to address. But anyway, we understand the challenge. And I think with the support of other countries as well that have the same aspiration to also benefit, because we need to make that mutual.
I wanted to go in that direction. What are the sort of triangular partnerships that you feel would be beneficial there? I know that Turkey, of course, has an export presence in many parts of the continent. India does in East Africa in particular, China, Europe. So who have you seen and identified as useful partners in this endeavor?
Look, today it's our building the infrastructure, and many of the countries that you highlighted are actually facing some of those challenges, but address them in their own way, creating their ship lines, creating the flights to these African. Still the challenge is what we're talking about, because we need to have a physical place where you put the goods and you distribute the goods. This is not something that is available. Have available banking services. Some countries have that available, and that's what we need to provide for ourselves as well. The export guarantee programs that is provided by the African Exim and others, we need to expand these programs as well. These infrastructure are basic ingredients for trade, and that's what we need to provide. But also, as I said, we need to understand what we can import from Africa and actually start industrializing some of these elements that, again, now is coming to everywhere in the world. We need to do it in Africa as well. We need to manufacture and industrialize in Africa as well.
I'm going to end with one last question, which sort of I'm going to draw on your background, many years in finance. In anything that, as you mentioned, export guarantees are an important component of developing these trade routes. Investment into physical infrastructure requires, again, financial capital to flow effectively. When you look at the state of development finance, multilateral development banks, but also regional development banks, what are the things that you would like to see change? And unfortunately, we can't at this point in human history say more money. But other than more money, how can it be used more effectively and more efficiently, in your opinion?
Of course, definitely we need more money. You know, multilateral organizations are vital because they have the expertise to do development and actually make return. And this is sustainability at the core of finance. But I think, again, expanding that into developing countries is key. Yeah. And again, when you look at some of these organizations, what they do, I mean, they say in Africa, let's take Africa. They do very little in Africa. And we need to expand this. And they have the capacity to expand in Africa. It's the risk profile, and that's what we need to change. The infrastructure works that I just mentioned that we're trying to do is best to be done in collaboration with the multilateral organizations because they have the expertise, they have the funding capabilities to do. They have the export guarantee programs that can help scale up. The challenge is, as I said, is that we need to put some focus into the developing countries. The only way is to get this development finance. And of course, again, we need to avail this at rates that are affordable as well for many countries that cannot afford it today. Again, one of the challenges globally today is that most countries are out of COVID with a high debt to GDP. So the capacity on the fiscal capacity to be able to borrow more is less and less. And this is what we need to solve. And again, multilateralism is, at least multilateral organizations, are, in my view, an essential part of this.
Thank you, Minister. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we will see you again in India, and I hope the relations will also grow.
Thank you very
much.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure.